Hello everybody, welcome to this webinar about how to take control of Teams and SharePoint with effective governance and security. My name is Atle Schekkeland, CEO of Infotechtion and the Microsoft MVP for Microsoft Purview. And I'm joined here with an awesome colleague, Vivek. You want to introduce yourself?
Hello everyone, I'm CTO at Infotechtion, and I'll be joining today in Atle's session about Teams and SharePoint governance.
And the slides will be also shared together with the recording after the webinar. So if there's things you find useful here, you don't have to take screenshots. You will get the slides afterwards. You also have the ability to ask questions using the chat function. So if there are things along the way, type it in there. But we also try to, address that at the end for a Q&A session. So I'll kick this off by looking at the big picture, more into details, and then we'll do some demonstrations also at the end. So to kick things off, just give me a second. Yeah. So first of all, the big picture of you need to protect your data. You need to secure and govern your data. Why? One is just the attack and the risk from external actors. There's a joke in cybersecurity that there are two types of organization, those that have been hacked and those that don't know they have been hacked. So when people then get into your organization, how to ensure that the sensitive, the important, the crown jewels are protected. Second is just insiders. There's around 20% currently of data leakage that come from insiders, according to Microsoft research. But I believe that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's actually a lot more. Is like one CISO told me a few weeks ago, we haven't discovered any data theft, but we are quite often, we find it strange how some of our competitors' product looks exactly the same as ours. So there is absolutely things going on. But also that people do the wrong thing. For example, they upload sensitive information, privacy data to a SharePoint site at Teams that's accessible to too many people, where GDPR required a need to know, and similar for other jurisdictions on privacy regulation. And lastly, which is becoming perhaps a really good and strong driver for the moment, and that is Gen AI and all the AI tools. How to ensure that the data that consumed to create new content is the right data and doesn't create any also risks for organization. So that's one side of the coin, but there's also the other one about data governance. If you look at some research from years ago that basically said that 25% in average of unstructured data has value, 5% is subject to regulatory record keeping requirements, 2% is subject to legal hold, a lot of American companies here, but the remaining stuff is basically just work in progress that ended up being redundant, obsolete, and trivial, 68%. So it means that if you're storing things forever and keeping SharePoint sites, Teams forever, most of it is going to be rot. But there will be also something that's really important to keep for the future, even based on laws and regulations. And if you do not start deleting and thinking about life cycle of either the workspaces or the data, you have risks and cost going up. And on the right-hand side, you see some of perhaps most common, especially the storage cost. I remember a few years ago working with large organization, and we talked about capacity in M365, and the people said, no, we have plenty of capacity, no worries. But more now, more organizations actually paying extra for that. But it's also about the privacy risks, for example, of keeping privacy data. Could be performance review, resumes, these type of things forever. That's in breach of GDPR. GDPR have requirement principles of storage limitation and data minimization. So basically, once privacy data has met its purpose, it should be deleted, or must be deleted if I'm going to use that term. And of course, there's also other things like cybersecurity risk. In ISO 27001, there's actually one to control this deletion, get rid of it, reduce the attack surface, even though there's many organizations that haven't yet taken action on that. So those are some of the big picture what we need to do. But let me just show this on, okay, what about then Purview, Microsoft Purview? And I'm just going to use one slide for this, because an important part then is to classify what's important. And that will use these sensitivity labels. And it can also then have encryption linked to an access group. So only these people will have access to it once it's labeled. And if you take control of the workspace, then you can also control the security and governance around the workspace. And you can set a default label on the library folder so that when your files stored uploaded to a confidential Teams and SharePoint site, it automatically classified as confidential or top secret or whatever your classification might be. And then you implement then data loss prevention policies to protect that information, the sensitive information that's classified. And there's lots of different DLP things here. You have Office DLP with policy for users. You have Endpoint DLP to protect information. You have Copilot DLP and other things that actually help you then to avoid loss of that data. And another key building blocks I want you to keep in mind is inside risk management, because that helps you also identify the unknowns. Or perhaps the better example would be when people circumvent the loss prevention, but also to show abnormal behavior. So those are some of the 3 building blocks, but there's more I would like you to consider. And we're going to cover this a little bit. SAM, SharePoint Advanced Management, which is now available if you have a Copilot license. And that basically allows you also to limit access, for example, what Copilot can reference also. But the best thing is really to have good identity and access management to ensure that people need to have what the people need to access, they have access, but not more. A few other things to consider is, especially in these days with shadow AI and other apps, are there some risky apps, block access? And there's more and more also functionality coming that if you have low risk apps like ChatGPT, and I take from a Teams their SharePoint file, work on that and say, oh, that's important. Let me see if I can use ChatGPT to summarize that or create something new from it. You can have, before users are allowed to go to those solutions, they accept terms and conditions as to ensure that they know what they can use and copy and work on with shadow AI or third-party AI, but also perhaps stop them from uploading confidential information, but not internal or public information. So there's more functionality also coming on that to ensure that we can benefit from solutions outside organization, but at the same time, we don't create risk for ourselves with confidential information, sensitive information being lost to those type of third-party solution outside the company control. Deleting data that doesn't have value. We learned in big data many years ago, garbage in, garbage out. And it's a little bit here, also from this risk and cost perspective I talked about earlier on. And the last 2 things is posture management, which is quite a new solution in Purview, both digital security posture management, DSPM. I don't know how marketing department came up with that, but it's a more and more common term. But also DSPM for AI, to basically continuous visibility and control of how sensitive data is handled. And lastly, more and more look at Copilot, security Copilot in this context, to basically help you accelerate detection, investigation and response to data risk and the areas where you see things are not working as well, or just to help you understand that. So those are some of the, I would say, building blocks for managing the data, even though the focus here is the container which the data is stored and security and governance around that. And one example I want to give on that is that square box on top. Because if in information protection, you have sensitivity labels for the files and emails, but you also have container labels. So which is an evolving functionality. So what you see here is just an example that, for example, you have a label, could be internal with external, internal with, without externals, or confidential with externals. And then you tighten the security and governance depending on the sensitivity of the workspace. And actually what you see on most of the screens here is actually E3 functionality, but evolving what you can do. For example, if it's really confidential workspace, only managed devices can access it. And then on the right-hand side, if you have the IPG add-on license, E5 compliance or E5, you can also have a default sensitivity label so that any file you upload automatically gets classified. So that's just one example of something that's really important in addition to the sensitivity labels for files and emails, and that's the secure the workspaces with a container label within Purview. So if this is what are opportunities, so what then back then to the workspace itself and the governance around it. So this is to share 2 research slides from the analyst Gartner. They say basically in a report a while back that what are risks without workspace governance? One is the compliance risk, meaning, for example, the example I made earlier on, that privacy data is kept forever, which is against GDPR principles. once it met its business purpose. Second is oversharing of sensitive data. Do people know that this is who have access to this? This is a need-to-know basis, and there's not only privacy data that's requirement to a need-to-know. It could also power-sensitive data and other lot of other categories, especially within NIS2 directive. And of course, there's also, if people set these SharePoint sites and Teams up to however they want, you're also going to impact the user experience and a lot of ROT, which impact also the search and the effectiveness of the digital workplace. Even though the more and more organizations are coming to us talking about number 4 as the main one, that is, we are paying millions already in additional SharePoint storage cost. How do you address that? So that was why one of the reasons Gartner thinks that you need to look at workspace governance. One more thing from Gartner, and there's 4 things I want to address here from them. They basically is that 365 currently provides 11 different types of collaborative workspaces that can be created by users on their own, unless you turn it on, and 8 of them have a SharePoint site in the background. And the organization that doesn't actually take control over this actually see that duplicated, redundant, or rot also content is spread across their tenant, impacting both search, but also risk of data leakage and oversharing. And according to Gartner, the native governance and lifecycle capabilities or controls required to combat the workspace crawls are, how to say, within Microsoft native features, it only really meets 35% of the essential controls that organization should have. So that's Gartner analyst, but again, this is changing as we speak. And therefore, Gartner is basically saying extended native workspace governance lifecycle controls, and you have to do that with custom solution or third-party solution. And if the answer is buy or build, their recommendation is really then to go move into buy if you can't have it, instead of building your own. And it has also to do with that Microsoft are continuously coming up with new features and solutions, which means if you build it yourself, you're on the hook then to keep and maintain that, versus a third part when you buy this as a service. So that's a little bit of Gartner research. Let's come back then to our recommendation, having worked with this extensively for over years. So if you then decide that, okay, we need workspace governance there to automate the security and governance controls, there are a couple of things I want you to consider. One is, should you restrict workspace provisioning to specific users, for example, a line manager, so that you ensure that the new Teams and SharePoint sites aligns with the structure it should have within the department to keep it simple? Or should you pre-approval? Instead of just allowing everybody to do like they do now, and instead tighten that down a little bit. Enforce some naming conventions. It could be as simple as just having people understand who owns this SharePoint site, which function, department, or project it belongs to. Or it can even be within that. For example, for a large energy company in subsurface, we have a naming convention linked to what type of information asset it contained. For example, was this a well, a license site, a prospect site, a geophysical service site? So you have a standard naming convention linked to that. But that's a little bit more advanced level. And also to create custom templates to support business scenarios. For example, if you have a standardized project management or capital investment governing requirement, then you can say for decision get 1, 2, 3, and so on, what are the things a standardized project structure with channels and folders that support that. And also that when people are owners, that they understand the responsibilities. There could be an upfront training class they have to take, a video before actually it's created, but it can also be ongoing things like email notification and other things to ensure that they understand their role and responsibilities. We mentioned it earlier on, link workspaces to information protection policies. For example, the more sensitive the workspace is, the more better is the security, the stronger security and governance. The number 6 there, enforced collection of custom metadata. It's for me, it's a no-brainer, but perhaps help more describe what that actually means. If I know what country, for example, this workspace belongs to, then I can have unique rules for that country, which often is required. If I know which function it belongs to, I can easier control that within that function. So having some of those, custom metadata in the property bag especially, is a way to actually help govern things and automate governance, especially if you have different rules and for different regions or business areas. Then we have configure entitlement packages. It basically means that if you come as a new user into an organization, how do you get access to what you need? And that basically means that instead of having by invitation only, which could be still good for confidential or top secret site, but at least for internal things that people can, how to say, then automatically get access to what they need based on their job. If that's not easy to predefine, another way is to use entitlement management, which is part in Entra, to basically then have them apply for packages via preview approval process. What you also should have an inventory of what you have, so you can have to keep things, follow up on things, and there are a process to ensure that the users that belongs to a group are actually the right users over time, and the guests should be there also over time, or if not kicked out. And lastly, perhaps one of the most important is that you have a life cycle around it. So when a workspace is no longer active, what do we do? For example, if it only contains a few important documentation, move that over to somewhere else and then delete the workspace. And basically, or if it's a project, no, it's going to be closed down and then handed over to whoever is going to manage the deliverables of the project. So just keep those 10, and I know there's more, but those are 10 perhaps of the most important ones that we found when working on this. So our conclusion, therefore, and recommendation is that yes, we would like to keep our M365 environment as out of the box as possible, but for ensuring you can automate security and governance controls for workspaces, highly recommend you to then either buy or build a workspace governance provisioning solution on top of it. So and that means also turning off that ability to create your own Teams and SharePoint sites, instead to funnel them into, how to say, a process going through. And let me show that a few examples of that before I'm going to ask Vivek to demonstrate some of these things. First is, there's an old saying, if somebody is sick, then first stop the bleeding, then fix the patient. So let's focus first usually on moving forward. How do we ensure that the new Teams and SharePoint site created tomorrow has the required governance and controls? And that usually means a provisioning solution, which link to then either within Teams. So within Teams, instead of that, create your own. You have just a button there that creates it. It could be a standalone application, or it could be a ServiceNow or another type of solution when you go to it. But the main point is keep it intuitive for users, but control the process. Could be a form you then fill in with questions, and based on that, we know what custom metadata we should add, what container label we should add, and so on. And if you look then at first be and then stop the bleeding, how do we then fix the patient? Awful lot of you, I'm guessing on the call here, have a lot of sites where the owners are not longer there. They're basically ownerless sites, or the owners, like they moved the apartment or somewhere else, they don't really have any ownership to the Teams and SharePoint site. So it often means that we have to start a little bit detective work here. First of all, is to basically gather insight about current sites. What are the name, the owners, last activity, and so on. And also, where do they belong? For example, if you had an owner that left the organization, where did he work? Because at least then we know what department or function that workspace belonged to. And we often found that it's good in the third point there to engage leaders to basically establish rules. So if a workspace owner doesn't exist, what should happen? If there is one, but they never respond to anything, what should happen? So basically having engagement with leaders and anchor that up in the organization before we start fixing the patient. And to go into this a little bit more detail, SharePoint Advanced Management, that used to be priced quite high, but now part of, if you have a Copilot license, you can start using it, has more and more the workflow around this built in, instead of having to build it yourself or rely on third party. For example, what you see on the left, you can set the policy on that, what type of site should we connect this policy be for. Could it be a classic site, communication site, team sites, and so on. And also are there, how to say, on the right-hand side, who should be responsible for each owner? How many owners should you have? And perhaps this part here is interesting, is who should be notified by email to assign or claim site responsibility? Should it be site admins, if any? Should it be the manager of the previous owner? Or should it be the most active members that had worked on the site? So based on that, what happens? So there are some functionality you should look at in SharePoint Advanced Management to basically manage the lifecycle and expiry process of 365 groups with Teams and SharePoint sites. So, but one also then in fixing after stopping the bleeding, then addressing fixing the patient. We need them to go back to the previous sites and figure out what's the sensitivity of that. Which business function does it belong to? What country is relevant for? Is it across them all in a large organization? So often that ends up being like a form that we use, perhaps the same form we used for provisioning of new Teams and SharePoint sites. We use the same form to go back to owners and basically to get them to fill in. For example, how sensitive is the workspace or the file store there to help us set container label and default sensitivity label, but also other things like the custom metadata we talked about. And then gather that information in the index database so we can use that to also then in the next step of applying that governance and security controls. But you should also do a quality checker to see, are there public workspaces here that should be private workspaces? Because if people are setting this up ad hoc, there will be issues, and probably many of you have already discovered that. And if there's no response to the correspondence, the emails asking them, then it goes back to the previous slide of, okay, we escalated to the managers with the established rules. And from a technical side, I would say prioritize really what's been classified as confidential, especially perhaps starting with the active versus non-active. The internal classified workspaces are the least important here, in my opinion. And you often have to then develop or use scripts then to set container label, default label, the property bag values and so on for existing based on what people then responded to your analysis. And there are issues with throttling here, so you could actually engage marketers to see it as a way to work around that, improve things, and also just to figure out how do I do this in best possible way to ensure that this goes as streamlined as possible, even though there's always surprises. And once you set the container labels and sensitivity labels on the property bag on pre-existing site, think through also and evaluate what about pre-existing files on those. Currently, if you apply a default sensitivity label on a library, only new files that's uploaded get automatically classified with that label. But in the roadmap, I don't have a timeline for it yet. There's also going to be the ability that any pre-existing files then automatically also get that. If you're not willing to wait for that, then it's another script actually to do that. But I think that could be coming quite fast. I was actually asking engineering about this last week, but we don't really have a timeline still yet for it. But again, starting that process of first addressing the new stuff and then the pre-existing stuff. That's a little bit on the big picture of what you need to do and the recommendation of how to do it. But to make this even more practical, to demonstrate how this actually could look like, I'm going to hand over to my colleague Vivek to take us through that.
Thank you, Atle. Very insightful. Just a couple of points to kind of pick from where you left. Especially we are hearing from organizations and, from a security perspective, if the objective is to label your information, your data with sensitivity labels, retention labels, etc., which really is the last line of defense, especially with encryption, then workspace governance can play a really important role in accelerating the speed at which your information can get the labels. Even if you are an E5 customer, for example, Microsoft Purview can only label 100,000 files per day. So for an organization with 10 million files, 12 million files, especially pre-existing files, it could still take months before all of those files receive the label. So if we go to the next slide, please, Atle, I have some screenshots, just a high-level architecture. So first of all, IR workspace governance solution has been designed in mind that not every single organization or every single customer will all be on E5 or add-on licenses. But every single organization who is using Microsoft 365, whether you are E3, A3, F1, different variations of the foundational plan, so the foundational licenses which you buy, we wanted the solution to work with every single one of those licenses. So we have designed this in a way that you don't need to upgrade your licenses. Your existing licenses are sufficient. And we have also designed in a way that in addition to using IARM provisioning solution, there are no hidden costs from other licenses, premium connectors, etc. So it's fully self-sufficient in a way and is designed using the capabilities which already exist within your Microsoft infrastructure. So no new tech stack has been introduced into this. The user interface is built in Power Apps, and hence it can be easily made available within the Teams interface natively as an app. It can also be a browser-based app or a mobile-based app. And Atle just mentioned the richness of all the capabilities exist in the backend, which can also integrate with your service management tools. So if you have a system whereby you create forms for collecting information, for collecting requests from users through solutions like ServiceNow, then IARM Provisioning Hub can integrate. So it has its own user interface, but it can also integrate with other applications if you are using them as user interfaces. Next slide, please, Atle. Okay, so this is the high-level view of the front end. This is deployed for, this is a screenshot deployed for a few councils within UK who are on E3 licenses. And when a user logs in, they see an experience like this where you can display your own banner, your own information. The application also supports providing hyperlinks if you have your learning management system or a portal where you are publishing more information about governance, best practices, data security, data governance, etc. And more importantly, you can also provide your users a control way through which they can either create a team site or a SharePoint site. And also, if a user is looking for a team, today in Microsoft Teams, it's very difficult to discover a team. We've also made it very easy for users to discover a team which they are not a member of, and they could request access to that team instead of creating a brand new team. Okay. We are also supporting Viva Engage communities, for example. So everything which can in the backend create a SharePoint site or a Microsoft 365 group, all of those are supported through the Microsoft 365 Provisioning Hub in IARM. Next slide, please. Just a bit of a quick look at what does a view or discover team look like. You can view the teams. We also bring in the information about what that team is, if that team has any sensitivity defined to it, and also the most important thing, how active that team is. So based on the last activity in the team, the number of owners, the number of members, etc., a user can decide whether they want to request access to that team. The request access to that team is a very important step because the request always goes to the team owner of a team. And it's up to the team owner who can decide whether to provide access, grant access, or request for more information from the user who is requesting access to this team, for example, the purpose, etc. But it is quite important that users are able to understand that there are teams which exist in the organization, which they could be joining if they were looking for collaborating on a specific purpose or an activity. The solution will also give some guidance to users on whether they should be creating a team or a site or a channel within a team, etc. And that is guided through the set of questions the solution asks the user when they start to create a new team or a SharePoint site. So next slide, please. When a user creates a new workspace, whether it is team workspace or a SharePoint workspace, a user has three options available. They can either create that from scratch, could be a basic team that they can create. They can create from a template. Now, that's a very important aspect. So these are not just the Teams template, which you get within Microsoft Teams. Your administrators or your information governance team can design templates within IAM Provisioning Hub solution, those templates can be made available. And the benefit is that when a team or a site is created from those templates, then everything is provisioned. Everything is configured for users down to the level of defining how many libraries should be created within a site, how many folders you want to create, and do you want to restrict the users from creating new folders, etc. A template can also be used to define content type, metadata, the number of channels, shared or private channels, define memberships, also define whether when the team is created from this template, will it have retention capabilities? Will external guests be allowed into this team or not? So there's a whole host of things which are configurable and can be designed as part of the template creation experience to create a template which can be published to a specific set of users. And maybe you have a template for HR that you only want to target and be made available to HR users. So you can do that as well. And then the third option is create from an existing team. Maybe as a user, I've been working with a team and we have customers, scenarios, etc., where people work on a project and that project goes on for a few years. There is a structure and now a new project is required. So instead of creating a project from a template, you could also create a project from an existing team, which means the solution will automatically bring the new structure, the new updates that were created when the first time that team was created from a template. Now there are some additions to it, and they can be brought forward as well instead of creating from a template. And if you are interested in that very same structure, then that can be brought on through create from existing teams. So those are the three options available. Let's have a look at the next slide, please. So this is create from scratch experience. You can create a team, and it's a very, very simple form. We don't want to overload the users by asking a whole lot of questions. At the same time, this form is configurable. So as an administrator, you can ask different type of questions. You don't have to use the questions which come out of the box, but these are the questions which we ask. A team name has to be unique, and the system will not allow a user to create a team if it is a duplicate name. There's a group or department. So an organizational context is associated with a team. And based on that, behind the scenes, a team or a site will be associated with a hub site, which means you can also create navigational structures, etc., using the modern architecture within Microsoft 365 using the hub sites. These properties are also associated with the team or site property. And the benefit of that is when at scale, your governance teams want to deploy policies, rules, and they need to be targeted to a specific set of sites or a specific group of teams, then those properties can be used. And this is what Microsoft calls as adaptive scopes. And if you are using Microsoft Purview, and if you have tried to deploy policies, then there are limits to it. If you have to list down every single site that you want to deploy a policy to, you can only go as far as 100 sites. And no matter how small an organization is, every single organization has more than 100 sites or 100 teams. So there are kind of those controls which organizations run into an issue if they haven't thought about how to tag their sites, how to tag their teams. The provisioning solution takes care of it automatically. There is also an option to decide external users, and then some standard best practices which are quite common across all organizations, especially around primary owner, secondary owner, number of members, number of guests, etc. So in that case, the primary owner, whereas in a standard team or a site, SharePoint site scenario, you just have an owner group. And if there are 5 people who are owners within a site, it's very difficult to then figure out who is responsible for certification, for evaluating the compliance, etc. So we brought in the concept of primary owner, secondary owner. There could be multiples of those. And the primary owner is usually the person responsible for subsequent follow-on processes. For example, you may want to do a once-a-year certification of the teams to collect, as Atlas said, one of the essential capabilities is to collect additional information, what changed. And it's the primary owner who can take the responsibility of doing that. Maybe you're doing records management and your retention policies define that an information when it comes to the end of life cycle must be reviewed. In that case, that can be automatically tagged to the primary owner, and the primary owner can receive all the items which are due for disposal. They can decide on or work with their team to decide whether items should be disposed or retained or extended. So a number of those foundational capabilities which gets tagged will eventually help in driving and embedding those processes which otherwise become very difficult to implement. Next slide, please. So once you've filled in all the details, you receive a message, and then within seconds, a site or a team is created. And this works in two models. You can switch off the approval process. Some customers have chosen to just let the users create teams and sites the way they create today, but make sure that this solution is able to capture that information, is able to provide that structure, but no approval required. So in that case, within 3 seconds, a team or a site will be created, users will be notified, and they can start working with the teams and sites. But if there is a workflow enabled, then this will provide a notification to whoever is responsible for approving. All the approval notifications are through Teams notifications and email notifications. So it's integrated with the approval framework within Microsoft Teams and Outlook, where a task is assigned. The approver doesn't need to go to a different application. We use adaptive cards, which means within the Teams interface, they can just click the approve, or if they are within Outlook, they can also click approve from within the Outlook email. So it's all structured around the fluid framework, which Microsoft has brought in, low-code solutions, and also some of the adaptive capabilities which enable a user to perform the action within the application instead of having to go to a different browser. Next slide, please. Okay, you can also view the status of your requests. So especially important in case where there is a workflow is in play. And if a user has requested a team or a site, then within the application, there is a process to view the request and see if there are any comments, if additional information has been requested by the approver. So again, the same thing is that there is an opportunity to have a review process completed within the application. The approver can provide comments, request more information, and through the provisioning interface, a requester can provide more information instead of having to raise a completely brand new request because the approver didn't understand what that request was. So again, not very complex, but we wanted to make sure that a user can complete all of these actions within the context of the application. Next slide, please. The final piece is, of course, once these sites and teams are getting created, there is an element of telemetry around those. When you create a team or a site, even using the provisioning solution, like the one we showed you, those teams or sites can go out of compliance very, very quickly. You've decided the solution forces a user to select 2 owners, but those owners can leave the company. Those owners can go somewhere else. So the provisioning solution also comes with a reporting capability, which on a regular basis tracks the compliance of teams which have been either created using the provisioning solution or the pre-existing teams and sites. They are all measured against the rules which have been defined of what the definition of good looks like from a workspace governance perspective. They are all evaluated, and then there are a number of KPIs against which these dashboards are created. For example, teams without owners, teams without members, and also the teams which are contributing to your storage quota. So if there are specific teams which are not very active, but have large amount of content and are pushing your storage quota, your storage consumption closer to your storage quota, then you can come to this report and you can start to look at how do you handle those teams. Maybe there is a cleanup required. Maybe there is an option to archive those sites using some of the in-place archiving capabilities within Microsoft 365. And also here, you will also see one of the biggest issue, which I think from a security perspective within Microsoft 365, is once people start to use Teams and files and SharePoint sites, then it is very easy to share at a file level. So many of the reports that you get within Microsoft Admin Center, they don't tell you if a file has been shared, either within the organization or outside the organization. So this report specifically focuses on that as well. And within a team in the drill downs, you will be able to see how many files are shared with people who are not members of this team. And they could be internal people internal to your organization, they could be guests, and they could be external to your organization. So that's an important element that a team owner can go in and look at and have a consolidated view of their team, or an administrator can have that view at the tenant level to be able to identify where the risks may exist, that the team was created, the members were added, and now a lot of that content is actually shared with non-members of that team. And maybe there's an opportunity to do a cleanup because there is an instance of oversharing. So just to summarize, you get the whole experience integrated within Microsoft Teams or a standalone application where you can create a team or a site from scratch, from a template or from an existing one that you have access to. The system will also guide you whether you need a team or a site or a channel, etc., based on some best practices. A very few set of questions, only essential questions are captured. The rest is derived from those questions, and response to every question is translated into a control, which is applied to the team. Either it is in the form of a retention rule or a sensitivity rule or a sharing rule, etc. But they are all translated into the rules, which otherwise your administrators will have to run scripts, especially if you are an organization with an E3 license. A lot of these activities, you don't have the ability to be able to perform that automation. And so there could be an opportunity for you to kind of look at some of these solutions to embed those automations at that point in time when somebody is creating a new site. I don't know if there is any other slides.
You want to say just a little bit? Should we cover this?
Yeah. So it's all well and good to say that we'll plug in a solution and that will fix all of your new teams and sites. But there is hardly any organization these days who hasn't created a team. So there is every single scenario, every single organization, there is a need for that cleanup. So looking forward is addressed through the provisioning solution to make sure that you have a governance process that is self-sustaining and doesn't require an admin to run scripts when a team is created. But then also you require a process which allows you to look back and bring and review, first of all, to understand what exists today before you implement this process. Is it required? And if it is required, how do you apply the same controls to that information? So I won't walk you through this whole process, but the idea was to ensure that that it is understood that a process like this is required, and much of that can be driven through the insights and the reports which we deliver as part of our services, and also with the provisioning solution that brings those out-of-the-box reports based on the insights which are getting collected from Microsoft 365 workspaces and your data.
So thank you. So just a few things at the end before we open up the question. We also realized that it's not only to buy the solution, but it's also to maintain and manage things around it. So we're actually launching then also data governance as a service, which means that workspace governance as a service. So that basically is a monthly retainer where you basically get help not to actually manage and operate this if you don't have the resource internal. So I won't go through the details here, but you get the copies of the slides and you can review that. Vivek, any last comments before we address questions?
No, I think I just want to kind of say that, you know, this part is missed out, and I see time and again that in organization there isn't an owner for this. There is a modern work team, there is a security team, there is a records management team. So between those three teams, there isn't one ownership to determine how do we solve the controls around creating a workspace. And I think that's an important, and it will take these three teams to come together. As you can see, it isn't just about creating a team, it's about also deciding what retention rules do you need, what data security rules do you need, what data access rules do you need. So it is a combination, and I'm not sure whether it resonates or not, but I've seen this in multiples of our customers, that the ownership is lacking, and to address that, organizations go roundabout way and in a very expensive way to then address their security issues.
That's the end of the presentation and with the demonstration. I think we have a few minutes, even though we've tried to keep this now to 45 minutes, so we're a little bit over time, but again, just at least a question. Vivek, I don't know if you see the last few questions there. Do you want to address them?
I didn't.
Oh yeah, sorry, you're on the, yeah. Let me so in the solution, when using request to create a team based on existing team or based on the template. So it's in request to create a team based on existing team or a template, will the owners, members, and permission also copy over?
You have an option.
I think we might have lost sorry, go ahead.
Guests are not, but the owners. So there is an option to copy the owners of the team, but the guests and members are not copied.
Yeah. And for the reports, is it correct to assume that the reports were created in Power BI and embedded into the portal? Is the question?
Yes, yeah, these are Power BI reports, which means you can also update them if you like.
Yeah. It's another question. Was the portal created via Dynamics or model-driven Power Apps?
The portal is model-driven Power Apps.
Okay. And a couple of questions also. I have one question from our one of the Microsoft rock stars in data security and governance, Bernd, where what we were showing was that were they all part of the IRM solution?
No, this is just one part. So IARM has 4 key features. Workspace governance is one feature. We have an add-on to Microsoft Purview, which is advanced records lifecycle governance integrated. So that's sort of more E5 feature for E5 customers. We also have the ability to extend Microsoft Purview data discovery capabilities to non-Microsoft 365 sources to discover sensitive data and actually, apply controls, retention, sensitivity controls. And then the final feature that we've included as part of IARM now is help organizations get a better control on access to their data by AI applications. And so each one of these solutions build on Microsoft Purview platform capabilities and provide different levels of insights and also remediation orchestrations.
Bernd also corrected me in the chat here that it was Gartner that recommended to Microsoft to use the name Data Security Policy Management, not their own marketing. So I stand corrected. which also explain why that name is more complex than what the marketing department's names are usually been creating the last few years. So, so thank you for the correction. There's also a request for link to the Gartner document, please. So Vivek, I think you have that more easier at hand than me, but if you can just drop me a note on it and I'll share that with the person that, just a link to the document with the person that requested it after the call.
Yeah.
I would say thank you all for attending. If you want more information about IARM or need help discussing how do we do this governance, ping us, drop us a note. You have my email address there, so just drop me a note or go to our website to learn more. There's also more blog posts there about workspace governance and what to do and how to best do it. Again, thank you for your time. You will get a recording of this in your mailbox together with copies of the slide, and feel free to share that with friends and colleagues, perhaps even family if you want to. So thank you again. Thank you, Vivek, for joining me. Thank you all, and hope to see you soon again.
Thank you.